This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Barry Scollo, the Director of Tennis at the University of Bath. He discusses skill acquisition in chaos practices, as well as common threads and skills that the top players have. This podcast was also recorded over the internet, so it may sound a little different to normal. I hope you enjoy. So Barry, first of all, thanks for doing this. I guess the biggest question is, how are you in this COVID world, which is a bit different?
Yeah, very well. Thank you, Michael. Thanks for sort of having me on to do this. It's tough for everyone. It's tough for everyone, and we're in a relatively good situation. It's nice to have some family time, and I've got the boys at home doing their schooling and working for the university and TeamBath. Still sort of busy and plenty of video calls, conference calls, Microsoft Teams and Zoom and all sorts of things with the LTA as well. So coach education, things have been going on, and there's still applications and tenders I'm working on sort of behind the scenes and trying to communicate with our tennis network. So it's been a very, very different time, slightly tough in some moments, but also kind of good family time and doing okay, thank you.
Good. So obviously you've kind of linked to it there in terms of some of the roles that you have. Do you just want to explain to people kind of what exactly you do at TeamBath and beyond that, and explain what your role entails really?
Yeah, so my official role is Director of Tennis at the University of Bath, which has become known as TeamBath Tennis. It's quite a big network of the main centre at the University of Bath with the STV, and we've got 18 courts on that site, 18 tennis courts plus all the facilities there that the players can use. We then have our wider network of clubs in terms of Salford, Frome, Wellow, some of the schools, Prior Park, Moncton, Ralph Allen, and then we connect with places like Millfield or Hallows and other key schools and areas. So our network of tennis is over 3,500 people. And we have about 1,500 coaching bookings. In with all of that is a high performance elite academy that sort of some of the areas are linked with the LTA as a national governing body. We have our own academy, we have university students, and we have senior professionals that play at Grand Slams. And then beyond that, we have like I said, a club network and school sites that do a lot of mass participation and sort of trying to grow the game. And we also have sort of workforce development, coach education going on under the whole umbrella of TeamBath Tennis as well. My other role are British University coach, and I do little bits of coach education and presenting for the LTA.
So it's quite a big operation by the sounds of it. I guess from what you said there, you've kind of got two sides, which is like your participation side and then probably your elite side. In terms of pathways for tennis players in your program, could you give an example of what that may look like, be it from a Millfield or something like you said, or one of the clubs, kind of all the way through to if they were to make it to the kind of elite performance group?
Yeah, so we introduce players to the game very young. We have tennis tots. We call it tennis tots, and they could be sort of 3.5, 4 years old coming in to throw and catch a ball with their parents. And then it goes through the mini tennis transition of mini red, orange and green up to sort of 10, 11 years old, where they start the yellow ball, the normal, the tennis, if you like, you'd see at Wimbledon with that tennis ball. But we have progressions and skill acquisition all the way from 3, 4 years old through to 10. In terms of the performance pathway, we're a local performance development centre where the LTA, the national governing body for the Southwest and for sort of central sort of LTA, will pick players up, and we will have that from 6 to 10 years old. So they're sort of be starting to get identified. Still a lot of fun within those colour of tennis balls. And then from 10 to 14 is the Regional Performance Development Centre, so RPDC. So if you hear me say LPDC, that's Local Performance Development Centre, and RPDC is Regional Performance Development Centre. So that's 10 to 14. And then 14 plus is really then sort of going into GCSE, A-level, university, and then pro tennis. So from 6 years old through to university level pathway is the performance pathway that we have within the centre.
How many sites do the LTA have kind of around the country that work in a similar fashion to you guys?
Yeah, so not quite the same size as our centre, but the LTA will probably have 50 LPDCs, so local performance, and then 11 RPDCs, so regional performance development centres. There aren't 11 regions, as you know, in the UK, but because of London and the size, they've probably got 4 or 5 just around in and around the London area. So then you go to the normal areas, so South East, South West, Midlands, North and South Wales, and then that's what makes up the 11 regional centres. And then the 2 national centres currently are Loughborough and Stirling. So the LTA sort of centrally support those. Bath used to be one with Queen's Club and Loughborough, so that was a previous sort of structure. So they're the numbers around the national spread of centres.
And then I guess you mentioned there that kind of they can start off with your tennis tots that are real young ones and stuff, and then at a later date they might potentially get picked up. How does that like kind of talent spotting process go about? How are those type of individuals kind of brought into the system?
Yeah, so it happens through a number of ways. I mean, people are naturally attracted to a centre like ours just to get their kids active and get them into sport. And then what happens is we go to a lot of schools, so 25, 30 schools in the area. We invite kids back for fun days. And then we have kids in our own program that are starting to sort of, we have like a try, buy, sold sort of, they're trying tennis, they're buying into tennis, and then they're sort of sold on the sport. That's how they come into the centre, they start playing once, maybe twice. They might have an individual lesson. They might do the odd competition or play one of our internal team competitions. And we sort of build the process slowly and in a fun way. And there is no formal talent ID that I can sort of point to. But then sort of 6 to 10 years old, the LPDC will start to have maybe sort of subsidies for players doing 2 or 3 times a week or an individual lesson. So we can use a little bit of that LTA support to bring into sort of 6 to 10-year-olds to sort of really nudge them in the right direction and get them building a love and a passion for the sport to hopefully stay in a little bit longer term.
And then looking at kind of the coaches in and around that, obviously, if you're looking to keep players in or keep kids in and have a kind of good pathway for them, I'd imagine coaches are quite important in that. How does the process look for them? Do you have a group of coaches that will work up and down that range, or do you have specialists who work particularly at the tennis tots, and then you have specialists who will work with your elite players? How does that pathway for coaches look and the support that they can give?
Yeah, good question. It's similar to it's sort of a slight mixture of both. I've got a few coaches, very versatile coaches that really work up and down the program very well, from sort of 8 years old to 16 years old, and they can really work with any level of player. And then there are a few more specialised people, certainly with the skill acquisition, the younger kids, the mini tennis coaches, sort of 5, 6 years old to 10. They're really in tune with the mini tennis progressions, the mini tennis events that are held. It's almost like a special part of the industry. And then 10 to 14, again, we would have 2 or 3 specialist coaches working with that development age group, sort of 10 to 12, then moving into their teens. And then beyond that, we would have players that are really working with older athletes, used to working on the tour, being with more senior pros. And then, so it's a little mix of both, but in every area, we've probably got 2 to 3 specialist coaches, I would say, and then sort of 2, 3, 4 coaches that work up and down the program.
In terms of like qualifications for those type of coaches or how they end up in those areas, is there particular qualifications they go through in order to specialise in that, or is it just kind of skills that they've developed throughout their time coaching that then leads them down that path?
Yeah, there's we have our coaching badges, like I'm sure you would have in football. We go to level 5, so we have level 1 to 5, and that's your formal education. Then in and around those will be specialist courses around mini tennis, around certain age groups, around skill acquisition, around new developments, innovations for that age, best methods of teaching. So that the coaches will glue together that formal education with some real key developments workshops. They might be 1 or 2 days. There might be just a seminar. Might be an afternoon, on and off court. So that's what that development side, those specialist courses, really glue together that formal coach education of badges. So particularly level 3 to 4, 4 to 5, and then behind that is sort of the last part of your question. It's their experience in the game. It's what they have a passion for. It's where they're really best suited, and where they've done a lot of their hours of experience as a coach. So as a level 2, level 3, level 4 coach, if they're picking up 20, 30, 40 hours of experience, who's it with, what are they enjoying most? As they've tried different elements of the game, their own experiences and passions come out. and then that sits alongside as almost as a third column next to education formally, development, and then own passions and experiences, and where they want to work in the game and where the opportunities are. So I often say, in terms of TeamBath, it's quite a big operation. We've got sort of 30 coaches working in the program. It's the best and sometimes the worst place to work in terms of development as a coach, because you certainly can work in the area you're passionate about, but if you want to climb up and sort of progress, sometimes there's a lot of really established coaches in that area, and it's very hard. You almost need to move out to come back in and work in a where you've got more opportunity to work with older athletes if that's what you want to do, because we've got some quite established coaches with proven track records that have worked with Grand Slam level players at Wimbledon, French Open, and so on. So it's not very easy for a younger coach, just to move in to work with Grand Slam players or the university first team, because we've got someone really quite established, like I guess you would at Southampton. The head of the academy wouldn't move in to be straight away the manager of the first team. Not that I know a lot about football, but those progressions are slightly harder in bigger outfits and organisations. So getting that experience in different places is key as a coach, I think.
And then when you're looking for coaches, obviously if you've got vacancies and stuff there, how do you go about sourcing coaches? Is it a normal recruitment process, or is it former players, or how does that look?
Yeah, tennis is a small network. I mean, it may be similar to football. We all sort of know the main centres, we know the key areas, we know the real coaches doing a good job. We would then, due to being part of the university, we would go for a very structured, formal recruitment process that would involve application interview, on court, off court, potentially a follow up interview. And there can be fairly structured, then moving into sort of discussion type interviews and things like that. So we would run quite a comprehensive recruitment process, and we're quite lucky when we do put a job to advert. There are a lot of people wanting to be part of the TeamBath Tennis Network, which we're lucky to have.
So obviously, at the moment, you kind of sit atop of the TeamBath Tennis brand, if you like, and you obviously your experience is suited to that. I guess is going back to start is, how did you get to this? How did you get to the stage where you're a director of tennis, and kind of what are your experiences leading you into that role?
Yeah, no, I can't say there was a massively clear pathway that I was just ticking off boxes as I went. It didn't work that way. I played semi-professional till about 2001. Ran out of ideas, ran out of money, didn't know what else to do really. Found myself playing a tournament in Bath, really liked it. There was a university scholarship. I had ATP points at the time, and there was sort of, like I said, I'd run out. I sort of hit a brick wall, and I went to University of Bath, and I got a small tennis scholarship. I played for the first team. That's when it wasn't a very sort of strong university structure in this country back then, as there is now. So it was towards the end, you'd play Loughborough or one of the key unis and play a final, and that was that. And then just by chance, the LTA Academy was based at Bath at the time, and towards the end of my degree, I started as a rookie hitter coach. I was hitting with all the young kids. I really loved the area. I really loved being part of the LTA National Academy at the time. And then around 2004, 2005, I had a good mentor, Tito Vasquez, who was Argentinian Davis Cup coach. So I was very lucky to have a lot of key coaches that I worked with and mentored me. Nigel Sears, Tito Vasquez, Simon Jones, and these sorts of people. And then I became national coach very quickly. So 2005, 2006, I did a couple of years as LTA national coaches with age groups. So I took a lot of national teams away in different age groups. And then in 2007, Roger Draper came in and the whole LTA structure changed. So they went from a centralised system to a decentralised system. And Jed Roddy, at the time, you're probably sure you know Jed, he invited me to interview for Director of Tennis. Again, a very structured, sort of open process. I had some experience, but not a lot at 27. I think Jed was I'd like to think he was forward thinking, progressive, and he slightly thought in a slightly different way. And they gave me the job. I was partly shocked but it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, and I quickly had to learn management. I quickly had to learn and get a team together. It was quite a small program, 3 or 4 coaches, doing a good job, but I had to pick up a lot of different areas of expertise, because half of me still wanted to coach. Actually, what I wanted was to be a head coach. and I had to quickly finish off my final qualifications, level 4, level 5, in my first couple of years of getting the job. But there was such a potential at Bath and TeamBath in the area to grab hold of participation, to grab hold of performance. I could quickly scale it up, and some good things happened. The LTA supported us very, very well, and awards. The program won a few awards, which was nice. So the reputation built quite quickly, and then we built from there, really. So I sort of went on a pathway, but it wasn't structured in any way.
So obviously, I think from speaking to different people and coach developers stuff, quite your experiences as a younger coach and having maybe a mentor to lean on is quite a powerful thing in terms of guiding the way that you coach. Obviously, you've mentioned a couple of people there that you were fortunate to come across. Were there particular things that they taught you that you hadn't been aware of before, or particular skills that you were able to acquire from them during that period?
Yeah, I mean, and going back to the first part of your question, I think, and I was only just doing a talk at my former college on video call, and I've been so lucky with the mentors I've had in terms of leaders in tennis. Not necessarily household names. They're leading coaches, leading national coaches, international Davis Cup coaches. I've been so lucky, but I've also gone and sought out time. So whilst I was in the right place at the right time, I also, when I became director of tennis, I spent time in London with Paul Annacone, who was coach to Pete Sampras. I shadowed him. I went to observe Nigel Sears, who was a tour coach and head of women's tennis. So I spent hours and hours with these kind of people just in the background because I was allowed to. And that was phenomenal. So in terms of just trying to think of the second part of your question, the skills and things I picked up was communication, decision making, structuring a court, planning certain things, and all sorts of things like that. And then taking things from different people and sort of saying, well, how does that fit my mold? How does it fit the current job I'm in? How would that work? But what I've done is I've also continued the mentors now. I've continued sort of asking for advice. I think what's key, and the best bit of advice that I could give for this podcast, is a mentor as a trusted friend who you can just text at 11 o'clock at night to say, look, can I catch up tomorrow? I just need to have a quick chat about something. And then a mentor who is a little more formal. So you are going to have like a one-to-one with a real theme and a topic, and to try and draw out a goal or a future sort of next step out of that process. So there's two different types of mentor for me, because if you went to the Greek meaning of mentor, it is a trusted friend who you'd contact and have as a confidant at any time. So yeah, two streams of mentors: the trusted friend who you really respect and will give you that honest opinion, and you can contact any time, and the real formal mentoring that is like, this person their time is important, and you've got 1 hour with them to talk through a subject or a theme.
So would you say you learned more kind of off the court stuff than on court?
Oh, good question. On court or off court? Early in my career, definitely on court. It was all about being on court. It was about being a head coach or a national coach. The last sort of 5 to 6 years is about management, about leadership, about innovating off the court and marketing and getting the best, putting the program forward in the best light. So it's definitely been, and I'm moving more off court now, which I think is important for the size of the program. I can't be coaching hours and hours and leaving other sides of the program sort of left on its own.
So obviously, from what you're saying there, you spent quite a lot of time kind of considering the coach development side in terms of how you've gone and sought information or gathered sessions, all that type of stuff. Is that something that you look to filter down to your coaching staff at the moment? And what does that look like in terms of their coach development pathways?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Really lucky with the team. We've got a great group of people, and a lot of them do come and shadow. So some of the coaches who are on the club program come and shadow the performance coaches, and they're a little bit vice versa. So the high performance coaches can move in, and we've done shadowing before in the past with sort of leading tour coaches have gone and done some mini red sessions with 6-year-olds. So they're all sort of in a club environment and sort of testing their skills. So that's quite important. And then because we're an LTA recognised centre, some of the other courses that will go on around the country, so level 3s, level 4s, level 5s, will often email me and say, Barry, can we come and shadow you? Can we come and shadow the program? Can we come and observe what's going on at Bath? And we often on a monthly or bi-monthly basis have an external or a candidate on a level 4 or 5 coming in to watch what's going on at Bath, and we promote that, and I promote my coaches when they go on those courses to go out and go and look in London, go and look at some of the other big centres like Loughborough, and see what you can pick up from other places around the country. I think it's hugely important for coach development that those things happen, and you look outside your own house when time allows.
And I suppose in demographic of the UK and stuff, is there differences to like Bath compared to London compared to Stirling, and what do those differences look like in terms of maybe facilities or players or coaches?
Another really good question, Mike. The UK, the regions are very, very different. I mean, you take the southeast and London, and like I said, there's got 4 or 5 regional centres just in London or around the area to cover the southeast. And you look at the southwest in terms of it's a bit more sparse. There are a couple of big cities like Bristol and so on, Southampton, Exeter. But getting around is very difficult. And you could also say in London getting around is difficult. And then you go to the Midlands where, Nottingham, Leicester, Loughborough, you're all sort of within 20 minutes, an hour on a bypass or a motorway away from each other. So every region is really different and does need to be considered slightly more differently, in my opinion. I think the LTA are trying to do that. I think that each region, in terms of accessing, so for a kid in Cornwall, it's very difficult for them to access Bath, particularly during the week. If it's not a once a month type thing, if the kid in Cornwall or down in the right in the southwest can't get to Bath as the regional centre, that is a problem. And because we do want to get the best with the best players as much as possible, but they've got to go to school and they've got to do their thing. So regionally is I think there's still some things to do, but I think the LTA have been far more appreciative of the differences between all the regions.
And do you see differences from region to region, or is that a very individualised thing?
I think that's quite individualised. I think it's more with the coach and the principals and how they would like to sort of help build a player, or how that player they would like, if they set the vision. And we have playing principles at Bath about moving through the ball, moving up the court, taking on the second serve. We're looking at develop very attacking players, taking the ball on. It's so important. If you look at how the game's played at the very highest level, very difficult to play as a defensive player or as a counter puncher, and you saw, maybe Andy Murray as he's progressed through his career, and how you look at Roger Federer, staying up against the baseline, taking the ball on and taking time away from their opponents. That's a way that the game has to be played if you look at the future. So it's really how the individual coach goes about that, I would say.
You mentioned there kind of a philosophy at Bath. I guess, is that something that filters all the way through from those real younger ages? Maybe not the tennis tots when you're just working on fun and all that type of stuff, but is that something that's embedded in the club kind of as all the kids come through?
Yeah, it's 100%. And like you said, not quite maybe at the 5-6-year-old, slightly younger, wouldn't be there, but we would be looking at those principles of play and introducing them into mini tennis in a really fun way. And that's hugely important to us in the pathway. And as the players, as new coaches pick players up, but it's certainly part of our philosophy of attacking style of play, moving through the ball, all that sort of stuff, definitely.
And I guess something you've mentioned earlier was kind of around skill acquisition for players, and I guess a lot of their skills will link into your philosophy or your style of play. From a tennis point of view, how would you go about coaching or developing players' skills in specific areas? So, for example, if you're trying to teach a kid how to do a two-handed backhand, for example, or a slice shot on their backhand, how do you go around teaching them and developing those type of skills?
Yeah, it's I think from the beginning it's about sending and receiving. How because I think a lot of kids might be, hopefully they'll be able to send a ball, but it's how then they're receiving a ball in terms of, and I would really look at the individual, the player's age and stage and their relationship with the ball, and changing that up and using different variations of like I said, I mentioned the red, orange and green ball. You could use different variations of that, different spacing on the court, where they are on the court to develop that skill, so that you might bring them up really, really close to the net and just make the target quite big down the other end, and then you might move it back and progress it forward and back as you need to. And then with the older players, you really want them to sort of have a game-based, open approach. So there's, for every age and stage, there would be really different sort of things you'd put in place, and you would want to sort of move it up and down as the player was picking things up. But I think that sending and receiving type of element of the sport is huge, and then judging the distance, orientation to the ball, the space of the racket. With technique, we talk a lot about path, angle, speed, the pathway the racket takes, the angle of the racket on contact, and the speed of the shot. And a lot of that could be put to a lot of different sports. The path of your foot in football, or the angle where you might approach the ball, or the speed of or the weight of a pass. And that would be similar in other sports. So you could put path, angle, speed to a lot of techniques. The other one you could use we look at is ball, body, bat. So where is the ball? That orientation and distancing. The body, how do you set up your body? So you think of an old-fashioned bullfighter trying to position their body away from the ball. And the bat, then where is the racket? So the racket might be an afterthought, because if you've judged the ball, you've got your body right, then your racket might be half already in the right position to make contact with the strings. So there's a vast array of things across a pathway of tennis but I always come back to sending and receiving and finding the best contact. Tennis is about going from one good contact to another good contact as many times as you can, and that's where you look at someone like Djokovic. It's just, he contacts the ball so sweetly, so efficiently all the time.
And do you base that around repetition of that skill?
Yeah. Yes and no. Yeah. I mean, early on there will be an element of repetition and sort of, dare I say it, a little bit of block feeding or basket feeding is definitely a way to develop skill. And then you would want to open it out and look into a bit more chaos. So open rallies or open basket drills. So you would have players make their own decisions. So you would feed different types of shots. So you might feed a deep ball, a short ball, a faster ball, one with more spin, slice or top spin, and give them lots of different variations and things to look at. So they've got to manage ball, body, bat, or something like that. Sorry, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, for sure.
Sort of the chaos. So the block feeding, you might improve slightly quicker, but with chaos, you just throw it all into an open play. You might take longer, but improve better over time. So you're into open points, open play, game-based approach. Certainly with the older ones, sort of 12, 13 upwards.
So you at the 12 and 13 age group is the one where you add in more of a chaos type of practice.
Yeah, potentially you could bring it in earlier. You could certainly bring it in earlier if the players sort of 8 to 10 were very capable, even younger than that. And so they get some independent learning. They sort of figure some problems out from themselves. I think that is a big part of coaching. I think that is an important part. And you pose the problem, or you set up a condition type point. But then, yeah, you would certainly be looking to introduce that more and more as the player got older, for sure.
And in terms of condition type point, what type of practice or drill would you do that in tennis? What does that look like?
Yeah, you could start the point with a particular shot. So it might be forehand on the run. So you put in a particular feed of shot. So let's say forehand on the run. First ball's got to be a forehand on the run angle, and then the point is live, and then the point goes open. So you might close off the first couple of shots. So you might do backhand running to forehand, then play the point. You could do it with the scoring system. A lot of the time, momentum of a tennis match is always interesting. So we might give the player start with 2 serves, but as soon as you miss your first serve, you're down to 1 serve, or you've got 1 serve for the whole of the match. You don't yet get your 2 serves, or a player's working on their serve, you might give them 3 serves, so they can really start to play with that second serve spin. There's so many variations. There's sort of hundreds of examples you could condition points with, so players see the game slightly differently. The scoring system, as I said, is always a good one. So one with the serve again. A player who has game point or break point against them, they could serve from the service line. So they see themselves hitting a great serve at a big moment. Again, a hallmark of top players. They deliver that big shot or that big moment, or in football, that killer pass, or that they execute that finisher under pressure. I have a friend he did some talks with the FA actually about momentum or pressure or taking time away. And I think one of the examples was maybe a team having 13 or 14 players on one team versus 9 on the other. So the football team might have less players. So we're trying to always look at those scenarios and situations to throw into a game of tennis. We do a lot of threes practice, so 2 players against 1. So 2 on the baseline playing against 1 player. That puts the pressure on the 1. And I guess you would know similar examples.
I guess, do you do that for the entire group, or is that for the ones that you're trying to really push that maybe are going through quite a good spell and you're looking to develop them even further?
Yeah, I think you'll really be, talking about academy players. You definitely be more into the sort of end of the LPDC, more into the regional pathway players. You would definitely look at threes practice. You would look at condition points. You would look at decision making, and the higher and higher up, you would bring in that element of that demanding physical element. And I think the coach always needs to have a reason why they're setting that up. Why are you doing that drill? Why are you doing that practice? So, for example, basket feeding. Why are you doing basket feeding? Is it to execute skill? Is it to build confidence in a player, or is it to run them ragged? Because you could do those 3 things really well with a basket. So real detailed technical work, 1 ball at a time, very low intensity. Or you could do, right, we're going to a tournament, I'm just going to feed you this shot to build your confidence ready for the tournament. Or I could just feed them side to side 50 balls and bust the lungs a bit. So you can do variations of all of those. But if I see a coach doing a basket drill, I'll ask, why are you doing that? What's the real core reason behind that?
And I guess a lot of this kind of goes around to being individualised to the players' needs and what they want or what you think will help develop them. From your perspective, how does what type of work do you do for individualised development plans with your players? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean that's a key question because as an academy, you want like a theme and a curriculum of work. And let's say Monday you're going into developing the forehand as a weapon practice, but the player at the weekend has hit 30 double faults on their serve, and they're gonna come in Monday morning, and they're gonna want to warm up, but they're gonna say, look, I really need to practice my serve, particularly sort of the older players, and you're gonna go into a load of, it doesn't quite work. So you do need a hugely individualized approach. So I think that's partly the talent of the coach, structuring the session and making sure players really feel they've got stuff out of all that session. And then within the program is building individual lessons is still important at every age group. And if we can get 1-2 hours, what often happens is an academy approach. We have 3 players and we might have access to 2 courts, or we have 4 players and 2 courts. So we have a group running with a practice on 1 court, so the coach can get into 20 minutes, half an hour of real focused individual work with that player. So the 3 or 4 players are developing forehand as a weapon and moving forward. And then that player that hit 30 double faults will get into 20 minutes on their serve and then maybe follow it up with, you're going to hit the serve and follow it up with a forehand finish. So you can start to build your core curriculum work in perhaps, but really identify that player with individual work. And if you didn't have all those players, we do have a good 1-to-1 approach, individualized approach. And off the court, that could be video analysis. In a time like this, you could get video sent back and forward to develop video matches, writing down of goals and progression of that, splitting the screen, all the video analysis that you guys will do. So we try to individualize programs that way, first and foremost.
Do you have any formalized dialogue? Is there like a 12-week period where you sit down with them and say, this is what I want you to work on over the next 12 weeks? Is there anything formalized like that, or is it kind of on a weekly, monthly basis?
Yeah, usually, because we work with a lot of schools, as I mentioned at the beginning. Excuse me, we're on a termly. We work quite a lot around a termly basis in terms of termly goals, and then you have your micro goals in the week-to-week stuff. But we always try and scan ahead. We try and look 6 to 12 months ahead. One thing we've done as coaches that we introduced about a year ago was this idea of untouchable days. So the coaching team will meet for a whole day once a month to discuss key players, key programs, and scan ahead of particular goals for particular players and so on and so forth. So for core goal setting, it's around a term, so maybe September to Christmas, with individualized work each week, and then around process goals and then outcome goals and mental goals and so on.
And are the players or the kids involved in setting those, or are they something that you'll set to them and say, I've seen this in your game, so I think you need to work on this area?
I think, or I'd like to think, it's as two-way as possible. I do think the players are hugely involved, particularly at this time. I think the players have really started thinking about their game and how, when they come back out of lockdown, there's a couple of Zoom calls the guys are going to do with small groups of players over the next few weeks. And one of the things is, what is the one thing you'd like to get out of this lockdown period? Could be any part of your game. So that they've got to come with that. But then I'd say it is two-way, and it comes to the experience of the coach, the tournament schedule that's about to happen. There might be key things, if it was going to be outdoors on slower courts, and the training of that, and the experience of the coach having been to those events before, especially if the player hasn't been. So you're looking at different venues, different court surfaces, and the coach might have a lot to offer some goal setting around that. But as two-way as possible, definitely as even maybe more so as you get up the ages.
When you're looking at those older players maybe, and they've got something that's kind of a glaring area of development in their game, so it might be that they're realising on their second serve they're not able to conduct that properly, and that's leading them to losing points where people are being very aggressive on their second serve. How do you go about framing kind of a development plan around that? Because I'd imagine they want to win, and they're probably going to want to hide that part of their game so they can win the game. But then obviously it's important, if they're going to try and make it to the top level, that they have like a well-rounded type of game. So what does that look like in terms of framing that type of development area for a player?
Yeah, so I think firstly we try and get into the psyche, the mentality of the player. There might be players that really, they come thinking, right, I need to fix something, and there'll be other players that they don't want to make a big issue of it. So you've got to there'd be subtle approaches in the mentality you start with. And then I think the player and coach would sit down and frame it as a scheme of work with a vision at the end. So I was once described as sort of, you're dissatisfied. You've got, I think it's D plus V, like vision and then first step. You're dissatisfied with something, or the coach is dissatisfied, or the player is dissatisfied. That's why the mentality needs to be checked at the beginning. And then you frame a piece of work. Well, so what's the vision? So you don't want a second serve that's going to be attacked, is the example. What do we need to do? We need to adjust the ball toss or your position of your body or the racket head speed or something like that. And then you draw the picture and the vision of that work in 3 months, 6 months, whatever. We want it to look like this. And then you identify the first steps. So it's almost like a D plus V equals first steps. So dissatisfied, what's the vision, equals first steps type of approach. And we would frame that with the player individually. We might video it to begin with and then show them progress in a week or two so they feel building that confidence through that. And then ultimately you have to test it. You have to stress test it, don't you? And that's where you could take a couple of steps back, or you've taken a couple of steps forward, and there's the skill and the art of the coach.
Okay, so moving on slightly, obviously we're talking a lot about the kind of performance area now. Could you talk through what a schedule might look like for your performance athletes more at the top end, kind of like a weekly basis, what the curriculum would look like or what they do on a weekly basis, and then maybe what tournament schedules look like and how that affects your planning?
Yeah, so the seniors are... as you know, tennis is a global sport. Even slightly further down the rankings, players ranked, down to 1,000 in the world, even lower, have a real international sort of schedule. They can have an international schedule. We have a number of tournaments in this country, but not that many for sort of that mid-pro range level. Obviously, Wimbledon and the grass courts and other events around that. But that's if they can qualify in sort of top 250 in the world, top 200 in the world. So having them in to train is sort of really blocked out time. And we wouldn't necessarily put themes of work together. The coach might have an idea from when last time they saw them about really we need to work through moving through the ball, for example, or that transition to the net. But we know we might only have the player for 2 to 3 weeks, and then they go on the road for another 3 weeks. Or they're going to travel for another 2-week block, and we're looking at the grass court season. So before the virus, we were getting ready for the clay court season, and then we were going to be getting ready for the grass court season, and we know we have the players for a great block of time during that. So it's really done around these micro blocks of work, with hopefully the higher the level player the player goes, is identifying qualities of the French Open or Wimbledon or some of the lead up events that go to those events. If not, we're looking at the Challenger circuit or the 10K ITF circuit. And we really capture windows of time with the senior players, and that work needs to be done. So when you see the player on the road, that gives you a good chance of what to put back into training. It's when you don't see the player on the road or you can't stream their matches or get videos, that's when it gets a little harder.
What type of effect does format or surface have on your planning and in competition phase?
Yeah, I mean, we're really lucky in terms of the beauty of the sport is the variation, like the clay courts, higher bouncing ball, it will grab hold of the ball, it will give you a little bit more time. You might develop a higher sort of shot over the net, a bit more spin as well. Whereas on grass court, it's a bit faster, it's a lot faster, it's a little bit flatter, slightly lower over the net, different trajectories of the ball, how it travels. The sort of margin for error on some of the courts. Then you've got the hard courts, or particularly American hard courts, that are sort of in between. And preparing for those is there's all sorts of elements that you might adjust your S&C program. You might adjust the time you are on court. You might want to do more practice sets in different times. There's so many elements and facets that will go into that. We still have indoor tennis. There's a lot of indoor courts, and the tour does go indoor at the end of the season. So I think there's a lot to think about for the coach, and then the transitioning. So to answer your question, going from the fast court and buying a bit more time back is often maybe better, but a lot of the time you want to develop young players on slower surfaces, so they really maneuver the ball around. They're happy with the ball in play. I often liken it to a defender in football who's happy with the ball at their feet and ready to distribute the ball as and when is the right time, and not just hoof it blindly anywhere. And I think that sometimes the player treats the ball like a hot potato. They just want to get rid of it. But actually the slower surfaces allows them to maybe get a bit more height, a bit more spin, maneuver the player out and get the ball around your opponent, rather than the indoor courts are great, but if you're powerful and you can just hit through, that might lend itself to a particular type of play, or the server might take control. So you're adjusting your game accordingly for those surfaces in so many different ways. But for the youngsters, I would say it's been really good to train them on slower surfaces. So when the courts get resurfaced at Bath, I always ask them to be super slow. So the players are really happy with the ball in play, but at the same time developing weapons.
What type of weapons?
So the serve, forehand as a weapon, taking time away, being comfortable taking on second serves, moving forward, taking the ball out the air, being comfortable at the net. So that, being at the net, the closer you are to the net, the more time you take away. And I think that's one part of Federer, why the longevity of his career. If you watch how close he is to the baseline and how he takes time away, is just phenomenal. And how he can still do that nearly 40 years old. And then you look at, and only recently, actually, this is sort of during this time, scrolling through social media, Andre Agassi, probably, I don't know if you would have heard of Agassi.
Yeah, no, I have. I know Andre Agassi.
He was one of sort of probably an idol of Andy Murray. I watched a lot of Agassi growing up. But even if he turned 50, so to give you a bit of context to the story. So he turned 50 recently, so there's lots on social media about his birthday. So watching him play people like Nadal and Federer as they were coming up, you watch Agassi very close to the baseline, taking the ball on, giving his opponents no time. And that's a weapon in itself. And that was back then, you're talking sort of 15, 18 years ago. So it's fascinating to watch the players that are really capable of and have those weapons.
And then, although you want to create well-rounded athletes and players, there's probably some players that naturally find it easier on certain surfaces. So how do you navigate their perception of not going, I'm on a fast court, I can't deal with this, or I'm on clay, it's going to bounce, I always lose when I'm doing that. How do you navigate their mind frame going into a season or a particular court type?
Yeah, it's a good point, and it is hard because as we all know, players get things in their head that they can't do that well on that surface, or this isn't a good part of the year for me, or this isn't a good time. And I think it is about getting into their mindset and working on building that confidence up bit by bit, slowly, and proving to them. And sometimes it is you've got a very fast court player, hits the ball flat, doesn't want to be pushed back behind the baseline, doesn't want to shorten the point, is happy in the rally, and you've got to just you've got to work with them and sort of, especially the younger players, you've got to be developing players that can play on all surfaces and help develop those skills. So it's really about getting into some detailed work, saying, well, just one or two things could make the difference here, and let's get those two things right as priority. So really working on priority points that will help make other things slightly easier. It's not an easy task if a player has a fixed mindset on something. You've got a challenge on your hands as a coach to sort of bring them round, saying, look, I think you could really play on clay courts pretty well if you bring in a couple new areas to your game, but keep your core philosophy of how you want to play. You don't have to turn into a clay court player overnight. Let's bring an element of serve and volley into your games. And keep that going. And sort of give them a more balanced approach. But it's not an easy task.
Obviously, you've mentioned kind of throughout a lot about performance analysis and being able to use footage and stuff. How much does that play a part when you're going into a tournament and maybe you've got 32 players or whatever it is, 64 players, and you know that you've got this player in the first round, you have one of these two in the next one, and you can almost track your way through? Do you spend a lot of time looking at who your opponents could potentially be? Because obviously, I appreciate the different eras, but someone like Andy Roddick is a very different game plan to someone like Rafael Nadal.
Yeah, I mean, coming into tournaments, and I think you'd go match by match. You wouldn't be getting too far ahead, because if you're going in deep in those tournaments and you sort of know the players and the characters that come towards the end of those events, you would have hopefully played them before. And if you haven't, it's time to start building some intel. We were always talking with the players about a diary or some elements of intel on your opponents. In terms of preparing them, you would spend some time if you were going to play Roddick, and you've got to be comfortable returning the serve potentially maybe 4 to 6 feet further back than you normally would stand. Or if you're playing Nadal, what would be your tactics? It would be very hard. Would you want to get to the net a bit more and try and cut the points shorter? You would certainly look to spend time on that, but it's how confident and comfortable the player would be adjusting their tactics, because the two performance factors you can adjust in a match are your mentality and your tactics. You're not going to change your technique, and you're not going to change your physicality during that match. So it's those are the two areas you've got to work with. So at a tournament, watching video reruns or watching video replays, I think you would start with the player first and foremost, and say, look, you're watching the video, you could have gone down the line a bit more, or you need to build cross court more, but now you're going to play this person who doesn't move well, so let's keep them on the run or change direction or try and use the tactic of wrong footing. So you would work on mentality and tactics a lot more as you got into tournament phases, absolutely. And lots of coaches would argue be equally working on them in normal practice, depending on your age group.
Yeah. And then in terms of kind of a multidisciplinary approach and support, what type of support is put in for those type of players? Obviously, you've mentioned a little bit strength and conditioning and performance analysis, but what would go in to help that athlete perform in those type of tournaments?
Yeah, I mean, we would sort of, there would be an element of periodization, and you would have, there would have been physical blocks through the year, or there would have been windows of education for a younger athlete. So a 13-year-old you could call it a physical block, but you could call it a physical education period. That would be really led by the S&C in conjunction with the coach. They'd have physio or prehab sessions, so body management sessions. Video analysis would be largely done by the coach. They would all lead into a player's sort of makeup before an event. And if they're lucky or a higher level, they might have even one or two of those people around them when they're in tournament mode to help, really make those 1, 2, 3% improvements from match to match. Because I think that's the key. When I was a national coach and we had a player, I could really see the players that really were stepping up, because from match to match they were really taking on the learning. So we had a final once of an ITF, and the girls' match, the girl won in 3 sets, really tough 3 sets, and then actually had to play the same girl in the final the week after. They both reached the final again and adjusted her game, took on the learning, and won 6-3, 6-2. And you can also say there were other variables in there, or the girl didn't have such a good day, but that's always a good sign. I used to coach a player who played number 2 in the world before the Junior Wimbledon Championships. He played the number 2 in the world, beat him 7-5 in the third, and believe it or not, drew him first round again for Junior Wimbledon. So you're like, oh, how unlucky is this? And then the player I was working with at the time went and beat him 7-5, 6-4 in 2 sets. So you can point to those examples where the player's taken on something tactically, or they've just adjusted a position on court. But the leading players have a support network. Firstly at Bath, and we haven't got endless resources, so we can't always get S&C physio with the players on the road. But the players that have had our players in the past that have made a Davis Cup squad or a Fed Cup squad have really, had huge support, and it's been massive to their career progression.
And then how much of a development is strength and conditioning in tennis? I know from when I was growing up, look at someone like Andy Murray, who I remember getting cramps and stuff quite early on in his career, and the media kind of went after him a little bit and said he wasn't fit enough, and then seemed to kind of progress and maybe add a little bit more muscle to his frame and stuff. And towards the later part of his career, I know he's still going, but he seemed to be physically very good and could compete with your Nadals and your Djokovic's and stuff. How much of a development has that made to tennis, and what type of effects has that had on the game?
I think S&C it plays a massive part. It's a huge part of the players' development, part of their training. It's built into nearly all high performance programs now for many years. Like I said, sometimes the physical blocks, have been well sort of documented. The Andy Murray is a great example. I mean, what a physical specimen, but also the physical blocks he took in the off season, and how they are. You see loads of players on social media, posting about the hard work they're putting in the off season, and sending a message to other athletes of, like, I'm working really hard here, are you, sort of thing. But I think with the younger players, it's part of education. It's educating those players that S&C is vital for their general health, for their management, reduction of injury, confidence. It lends itself to well-being, mentality, staying injury-free. Is so many areas that S&C will support a player now. And at moments of their career, you could say S&C was more important than actually hitting tennis balls, particularly if you're coming back from injury and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, it plays a huge part, and we strive to have sort of best practice in that area. As you know, being at the STV, it's a massive part of what we do, and I think it's important to all young players, whether it's education or real physical development, like putting on muscle or building their cardiovascular or something.
And how much of that for you guys is done on court and working on specific areas, things like agility and stuff, and how much of that is done maybe in the gym or physio room with prehab and rehab sessions?
Yeah, difficult to put a number on the exact split, but we definitely do a lot of footwork sessions on the court. We might do some bungee work, so sort of where the player has the bungee around their waist and the coach is behind holding on to that. Sprints, repeat sprints. Like I said, specific court work, footwork patterns. They might do some medicine ball training on the court, and then the rest is off the court, on the track and in the gym. It might be a 50-50 split, or a 60-40 split, maybe with I'd say slightly more off the court. But you could argue that you go slightly more onto the court, depending on the philosophy of the S&C trainer and where their philosophy sits. So it might be, if it's more strength based, which is good, there's a little bit more weights and a bit more physical sort of lifting type stuff. And if it's more agility and movement and speed, might be more on the court.
And then in terms of like GPS tracking and all that type of stuff, is that available in tennis? Do you get figures on how many sprints players do, how many high intensity sprints, what distance they're covering during matches and all that type of stuff?
We don't do it too much with the TeamBath Tennis Academy players. Some of the higher level players have had access to GPS or heart rate monitoring while they're training, and then looked at that in terms of recovery states or lactic acid build up. We've done a lot. We've done some of that with the elite players. The junior players, again, I think it's about putting the basics in place with the younger players. And like I said, firstly, it's education. But if they're not sleeping right, eating right, then I don't think we get into those things, because there is an element of, well, we don't have all of those resources that maybe like Premier League football clubs have. And GPS things, I think we need to put some real core educational things in place around nutrition, sleep, well-being, recovery, before we start measuring some of those things with the younger players. But there's no reason why we wouldn't. So we were due to have players play Junior Wimbledon, and we would start to monitor them a lot closer, for sure.
And then to that educational process, how do you go about doing that? Is that on court? Is it off court? Is it with parents, without parents? Or does it depend on the ages you're talking to?
It's all of the above. I mean, we do a couple of off-court sessions a week that would be educational or mental skills type sessions, nutrition sessions. The S&C coach might come in. We might have a guest speaker come in and speak to the players. I often run parents' meetings and parents' chats. Since we try and do a lot in September, like I said, we work around the terms, and we have sort of reporting at the end of terms as well. And we include the parents and the players in that process. And I think, especially under 18, the parents, even older than 18, the parents play a huge role and influence on the athletes. So it's all of the above, and we have on and off court sessions weekly.
Okay, so this is something that obviously when I'm stopping past the courts and I watch, and it fascinates me, is training groups. And the reason I say that is obviously you're in an environment where in football you're kind of a team, and you win as a team, you lose as a team, or you kind of perform as a team. And if I'm doing my best, I'm making my teammate better, who then is going to help us on a game day. Obviously, tennis is inherently an individual sport to a degree, in terms of you're going out there on a match day and trying to perform. So when you're in a environment where you're competing against someone else, how do you manage that dynamic? Because I'd imagine, for example, if I'm giving him good quality serves all the time, and his and that's my skill, so I'm giving him really good serves all the time, my skill was my serve, he's getting loads of development of his returns, which eventually might make him better than me and might be able to nullify my super strength, if you know what I mean. So how's that dynamic managed?
I think you look at the bigger picture. You look at the bigger picture, and you look at yourself and improving and competing with yourself. And if that's if a scenario like that happens, then that player needs to look at what other area can I build to become a super strength to counteract that, because the players need to train together. They need to get in that group. They need to give each other good training, so they're improving and they're in the right environment. Somewhere like Bath, we need to put these groups together so they challenge each other. And the word compete is from Latin, is to conspire together to improve. So if players can conspire together, then you only really should be competing with yourself and making yourself better. I don't want to sound cheesy or fluffy with that, but the player needs to look beyond that and look to the bigger picture and all the hundreds of other competitors that are out there. Because our players need to hit together, and there is an inherently individual nature. It is tailored, and we could draw that player out and do individual things that are really specific to them without a sparring partner. But we have to have, because those sparring partners also bring variation. So it's the right-hander versus the left-hander. It's more of a baseline or a net player. They need to experience playing against all of them and the different types of ball they send. So we have not often, but we have a little bit of conflict. Obviously they're competing against each other, but they play sets, and there is the mental turmoil that they could go through. And we, as coaches, we have to manage that, and we have to set the scene, set the vision for the practice, reason why, what they're going to get out of it, even if they lose, because that person knows where they're serving. That's the nature of it. And I think tennis is a problem-solving sport. They've got to figure out how to solve problems, and the coach has to help them do that. There was a great interview with Agassi recently. I keep going back to Agassi just because it was in front of my mind, about returning Becker's serve. Becker's serve almost changed the game, and Agassi's return was one of the best, like Djokovic now. First 3 times they played, Agassi couldn't get near his serve. And then the 9 times after that, he watched all the videos, and Becker pointed his tongue in the area he was serving. So Agassi kept watching these videos, and when his tongue, before the serve, the tongue came through the middle of the mouth, and when he served wide, it came on the side. And the next 9 times, he beat him straight. And then they met for a beer many years later, and they started talking. And he goes, and Agassi had to let him know that he could read his tongue, and he read his serve. And he goes, you know what? Becker fell off his chair laughing, because he used to go back home to his wife and say, it's like the guy can read my mind. and tennis, so I've probably gone a long way from your point, but ultimately it's a problem-solving sport, and that player and their coach must solve the problem.
I mean, from your experiences in the performance side, obviously, is it difficult seeing a player that you've been working with struggling with a certain area where you have an answer or a possible answer? Because I know you're not really allowed dialogue back and forth whilst they're playing, are you?
No.
So how difficult is that, where from the sideline you might be able to see a possible answer, but then you're kind of wanting them to get that answer themselves, but they're just not able to do that? How frustrating is that?
It is frustrating, but then again, you've got to look at yourself and have you coached the player the right way to solve that problem on the court? Because there's an interesting argument, like Davis Cup and WTA, the coach is allowed on the court now. But then you could ask some purists and say, well, that's not the sport. The sport is to figure it out on there in the Colosseum on your own. You're a gladiator and you're fighting another gladiator. You don't get some outside help. So the outside help happens before the match starts. And as a coach, I would say, well, I haven't taught them to be a problem solver enough. I mean, it's incredibly frustrating if you know that opponent on every big point is serving wide and your player isn't picking that up. You're like, you're tearing your hair out. But then you've got to look at yourself as a coach and say, well, I haven't prepared them. We haven't done enough on that. And we need to create problem solvers that can make key decisions on the court. So it can be frustrating, and it has been frustrating in the past. And you do want to shout down to them. But on the flip side, you've got to say, well, actually, did I prepare them well enough?
And is there benefit from you guys being able to hit with them? So I know obviously in football it's difficult. We can't join in an under-9 session if you like, and you start score. I'd love to score goals against them. I didn't used to do it when I played, so it'd be great to score a load. But obviously for you guys, you can kind of get involved and hit with them or hit against them without too much risk of injury or anything like that. Does that have a real benefit in that type of problem-solving thing, where you can be really direct with the problems you're going to set them and see if they're able to figure those out?
Yeah, it does. I think it's not essential that the coaches has been a great player in the past. That it does help. It has to be like Tesco. Every little helps. If you've been a good player and you can compete with that player or put them in situations, it's a good thing. And then you can isolate that tactic and you can send the ball back like one of their opponents would. Yeah, it's a really positive part of your makeup as a coach, and to get in and spar. And sometimes in my role, because I haven't. I'm not on court all the time with the players. I sometimes like to go in and play against them to say, when you do that, I feel really on the back foot. Or when you do that, I feel really relieved because I feel I can come in and take time away from you. So sometimes if I'm not really sure where the player's at or I'm covering for another coach, I come in and I'll play against them and just say, that's what I felt and I was your opponent. And that is it is a useful tool that coaches can use, yeah.
And do those type of dialogues take place between players as well? So if you've got a training group and you've got, for them to have that level of understanding, obviously they'd have to be quite mature and quite forward thinking, but do those type of conversations take place between the group?
Yeah, absolutely. We try to encourage it. We really try to encourage, play a set thing your opponent did well, one thing you think they could do better, or an area where you felt under pressure. We try and encourage those types of dialogue and try and stand back as the coach and sort of get a bird's eye view of that conversation. I think that's important. Yeah, that is encouraged where we can with the right age groups.
And then looking on a more general scale, and you look at kind of the top end players, is there a common thread that you see between your Federers, your Nadals, your Murrays, your Djokovic's, to say that is why they're that little bit better than the rest, or that's why they've been able to come through the ranks and progress to the very top? Is there a common thread that you see in all those guys?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, is there a common thread? Yeah, I mean, there's probably a few. I think one of the big things I think is managing 5 sets. Is managing over 5 sets. I just think those 3 players particularly who have been leading the way for the last 15, 18 years they, in terms of quarterfinal, semi-final, final of Grand Slams, how they're the ones with the experience of winning 5 sets in those moments, because they're always at the back end of the tournament. So I think their management and how they cope, their match management over 5 sets is one. There's very few areas of weakness in any part of their game, but there's so many players that don't have a weakness. Now, how they take time away from their opponents, I think is massive. And then you look at their super strengths. So Federer's serve, and volley game, Murray and Djokovic's return, Nadal's forehand as a left-hander as well, and particularly on the clay and the slower surfaces. But I think their match management and belief in themselves and their just relentless point after point nature. I think what was fascinating was to see Dominic Thiem play Nadal last year, and to take a set off him in the final of the French, I thought was massive. And then he quickly went 4-love down, and he lost. I think he even admitted it. He probably switched off for 5 or 10 minutes. And Nadal was, taking a set off him at Roland Garros, and then he was 4-love down the next set. They just don't go away over 5 sets. You can beat them over 3 sets, but over 5 sets, I think is something slightly different. And I think that's what will be the player that can start to manage them and beat them. I mean, the last player to beat them, I think all 3 of them in the same tournament was now Nalbandian. So to beat Djokovic, Nadal and Federer, or the top 3 in one tournament, is very, very tough to do across 5 sets.
And obviously you mentioned right at the start of this conversation about momentum and how big a thing momentum is in tennis. And I guess that comes back into your management of points and of 5 set and stuff. What type of strategies are there in place to help manage that? Because like you said, you've switched off for 5-10 minutes, all of a sudden you've lost 2 or 3 games and you're like, well, this set's a write-off. And then before you know it, you're being a little bit lazier or a little bit lazy with your footwork, and then that runs into the next set, and then before you know, you're 2 sets down, you're like, well, I'm not going to get this back against top players. So what type of strategies are there that you can put in place to try and manage games like that?
Yeah, there's quite a few, and actually this is, I'm sure there is an expert actually in tennis, Alistair Hyam. He works with the FA a bit on momentum. It might be one for your next podcast. I don't want to steal his thunder, but I do a lot of work with him with the British University squad. And we talk a lot about momentum and match flow and turning points. And he is the expert. But what we do, there are strategies. The first strategy is the awareness of the scoring system. I mean, we have an amazing scoring system that, where do you start? You win the first set and you start from 0. If you said to a footballer, you're 3-0 up and you're going to start the second half 0-0 again, it'd be like, off.
Anarchy, yeah.
And so that flow of the match is incredible, and the points won and points lost. So going back to awareness, if you're 50-50, if you go 51 or 52% of the points, you have like 70% chance of winning the match. There is a scale. So even if you look at Djokovic or McEnroe or Federer in their season when they've won the most, they've only won 53-54% of the points. So points are constantly being won and lost. So then you move to turning points and key moments of the match. So your player misses an easy ball on match point, or they miss a break point opportunity. So as a tennis player, we mess around with the scoring system. So if you hit the ball in the net, you go back to love all. If you lose the game point, you go back to love all. We mess around with the scoring system to help get the player to understand and appreciate different types of points. We make them aware of the system. We sort of try and treat the game. You've got to be an optimist, because you need to step through the door at that moment to take your chance, and then you need to keep creating more chances, and then show them. We sort of match flow, so points go up and down, and you say at that point there you had the momentum with you, momentum was against you, and then there was a turning point that could have affected the match, but you didn't let it get to you, so you were mentally strong, or you employed the right tactic at that point. So it's a huge part of the game. So one other practice we do, one off-court session I did recently with a player was, you've got the better track record, you're the bigger, better player, you've won more, your ranking is higher, but on that day you're a 6 out of 10. And the player who's maybe not so good at ranking, you're playing him, and he's a bit of a nemesis for you, but on that day they're a 9 out of 10, but they're 9 and you're 6, so the same level. But when you play a 10, you win. So if you're a 6 that day and they're a 9, how are you going to manage that match? How are you going to stay patient? What are you going to do? Because you could lose on that day. So we do exercises like that, and a few others that I should think of more on the spot right now, but I can't. But yeah, that is, I think it's a whole topic in itself. And I know football is it's a huge topic in lots of sports, and you often hear it's like a Jedi, it's like an invisible force of the match flow and momentum has just shifted, and it could be a toilet break at the end of sets. I can go on and on about it, but there are a few specialists in the area, which is I find it really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating because I guess in tennis, similar to golf, where it gets highlighted a lot, your mistake, and then you're the one that has to deal with it because you're the only one there. Whereas in football, for example, goalkeeper might make a mistake. You might not see the ball again for 10 minutes because it's up the other end of the pitch, and whilst you're involved, you're not really involved. Whereas with tennis, like you said, your match point example, you might come into the net, hit it out on match point, you've got to return again in 30 seconds. So how in that 30-second period are you going to sort your head out and almost have amnesia to what's gone before?
Yeah. And that's going back to the main strand of those top players. That's what they do amazingly well. Djokovic, Nadal, especially. I mean, and Federer, you just have to look at his record, but they do that incredibly well. They just don't go away. I mean, again, Australian Open, I thought Thiem was going to beat Djokovic. I listened to it all on the radio, but somehow Djokovic still came through that match because he was there every single point.
Do you think a little bit it comes down to people being obviously in awe of them? Because I'm watching like the Michael Jordan documentary on Netflix at the moment, and a lot of his thing, obviously he's a great player, but a lot of it I think is down to the people being in awe of him. Like they would ask during the game, "Can I have your shoes after the game?" Mm-hmm. Which, when you're trying to compete against that person, it's kind of, you're a little bit looking up to them as well. Do you think that's a little bit of those four, just everyone constantly knowing that they are the top ones, or?
Yeah, I definitely think there's an element of that. There's certainly been an element over that. I mean, Federer back between sort of 2004 to 2007, Federer won 100%. 100% there was an element of that. And I worked with Dave Samuel, who wrote Locker Room Power, sort of the winning, that aura. You've won before you've gone on, the Muhammad Ali type thing. I think there is an aura still around at the moment, but especially Nadal on clay, or trying to beat him on clay, or Djokovic maybe on the hard courts. And I think for going on so many generations, how the next generation haven't quite broken up that group is, I find it, there was one person who hasn't done that yet, is strange, I think. But it certainly has played a part. It's difficult. Again, it's that aura. It's like an unseen thing that is there. Like momentum or this locker room power, as we call it.
Cool. So, Barry, I guess last question from me, and obviously we haven't gone a lot into your playing career or anything like that. So this might come into your playing career, it might come into your coaching career. But I ask it to everyone, which is, who's the best player you've played with or against, or the best coach you've worked either under or with or against, and why?
Can I do both?
Yeah.
And then coaching. So I was lucky enough to play a guy called Correa, who's an Argentinian, Orange Bowl and like sort of unofficial junior world championships. He was a phenomenal player in terms of the width of the court he could use, and the speed in which he was a very little guy, but he used speed and coordination. He wasn't a strong guy, but I lost in straight sets to him. It was on clay, probably not my best suited surface. But later on in his career, he was a dominant force on clay before Nadal. He made final of the French and semi-finals of the French Open and stuff like that. So I played against him. That was as a leading junior. That was an eye-opener, and probably the best player I played against. I played a couple of other good players as well, to be fair. And then coaching-wise, God, I mean, I've been so lucky to working with a phenomenal group of coaches, and it's difficult. But in terms of going back to the mentors I've had, I've been very lucky. I was able to shadow Paul Anacone, who coached Sampras, Nigel Sears, who worked with Hanchikova and Ivanovic. Lots of Leon Smith, who's Davis Cup captain. I've worked with him a bit with the juniors. I've been very fortunate. Alistair Hyam, he wrote Momentum. He consults, the LTA and FA on momentum things. So I've been really fortunate in my coaching career to work with so many great people that I think has served me so well. So I've been coaching a lot longer now. So I would probably point to that. I'll think of more after we hang up.
No, that's perfect. Well, listen, I appreciate your time, and hopefully, if you're keen, it'd be great to do it again, because I know there's loads of topics that we haven't touched on, and it'd be great to get you back in.
Real pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Cheers, Barry. Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.